Yeah, so the theme of this workshop is sort of less like direct seeded technologies. I just want to run you really quickly through the polyculture paddock method that we've been sort of using in this area for the last few years, and then we're also going to talk about direct seeding some native like for restoration. And yeah, sort of this came about in 2020 for Burning Horse. I've been doing permaculture and companion planting and just like in my greenhouse and in my backyard, I've been sort of experimenting with these sort of ecological principles and how I can grow my own food. But when I started to think about how we can scale that up to feeding 600 to 800 people for the festival, it's like well beyond the amount of transplants and like time watering and everything that I was prepared to put in. So I started thinking about how can we apply these principles of like diversity in plant communities, but at a sort of more agricultural scale, or at a scale that we can feed hundreds rather than just like me and the residents of the household here. So I was like, we've got all this infrastructure that we use for the farm. You know, we do about 40 hectares of winter crops each year. And as we transition to this, you know, multi-species crops that we saw in Friday on the farm tour, we had to get a new drill because our old one was like from the 70s and it was all good for planting pretty basic pastures and monoculture Swedes. But we wanted something that was a bit more robust that can have, you know, an oat and a sunflower and a rapeseed and a linseed all together. And so we're sowing and we're planting this like crops for the sheep. And I thought, oh, can we just use that same technology but put in like human consumption species? And so I was starting to order from King Seeds, and they send out a catalogue each year, and it's just got dozens, if not hundreds, of species of varieties of flowers and herbs and ornament of vegetables and organics. And you go through that thing, and if you're a plant lover, it gets you pretty excited, and you want it all. And that's generally like how I was feeling about it. So I went through and I just ordered everything that I thought looked pretty cool that I might want to eat. And so this equated to like 50 or 60 different species that year. And so we sort of just like got them and got a mixing bowl and just started pouring them in. And then like got a little bit intentional, but not too much. So just thinking, oh, maybe if I made some different blends and have themes of the different mixes. And so I sort of did that and then just sprinkled it in. I mixed it with some fine humates just because, you know, when we're planting a oat or a whole bunch of, you know, kale species together, they're quite close and together, or like grass, you want it really close. So you've got a heavy seeding rate of like 30 kgs per hectare. But with, if you're wanting cauliflower, you don't want so much seed. You want to have each individual plant have some space. So I was mixing in humates with the seed just to make it a bit lighter and then sowing it at a really light rate, about 5 kgs per hectare. And so I made these different blends and just put it in the tag drill and just tried it. We tried in this plot 3 years ago 50 by 50 square meters of sprayed ground, direct just sprayed on the grass, and then a 50 by 50 square meter cultivated ground where we ploughed and worked and created a seed bed. And then so that gave us a 100-meter strip, and we had 6 different strips that first year that we trialed, and 3 different blends. And those blends have evolved over the last 3 years to what we've now got is the luxuriant leaves. So the method we decided we called it Polyculture Paddock. And then, yeah, just like sticking to this alliterative theme, yeah, we went with luxuriant leaves, and that's things like mesclun mix, so all sorts of mizunas and mabunas and a variety of lettuce and a variety of kales and spinach, bok choy. And so it's anything that you can sort of like eat the leaf in a salad or in a, you know, you could saute or something, but keeping sort of leafy greens together. And then the next one was rampant roots. So this is carrots, turnips, parsnips, Swedes, kohlrabi, and it was anything that basically you put in the fork in the ground and lift it up, you'll find stuff underground that's edible. And that just sort of made it a bit easier. We have a lot of like workways and volunteers come through, and particularly at like a time like Burning Horse, my head's in about a million places. So it's pretty easy if I can just say, if you go to the second strip around and put a fork in the ground, you'll find stuff under there and we can turn that into a soup. And so it was sort of just like for that reason that the design, but keeping them in these sort of groupings just made it a bit easier to manage, still keep like really high diversity, but it sort of just had themes. And then the third one was the multitudinous mix. And this one was really diverse. I think we had 40 plus species in that one alone. And this was a mixture of wildflowers and pollinating species, as well as herbs and coriander, and just, you can see sunflowers in the back. And it was a little less orientated towards the human consumption and a little more towards like ecosystem services. And so with these three blends, I've sort of just been modifying the different ratios. King Seeds has been really awesome to work with. This year, actually, I just sort of sent them what species I wanted in the three mix, and they pre-mixed and sent it out, and that was a bit more methodical than my mixing bowl that they would use a couple of years before. And so it's just been like quite an exciting ride. The very first year we did it was incredibly successful. We just had this carpet of leafy greens, and it was like we sort of harvested it about 5 weeks after the first sowing, and I was like, wow, I've never had greens like this. All the work that I put in my backyard in, this only took about an afternoon to implement. And it was just like way more food than what I get out so it sort of like reversed this ratio of input to output like this. And I thought it was like, wow, like most farmers and landowners have machinery. Anyone that can sow a grass or sow a field of maize or swedes could sow a paddock of polyculture vegetables and herbs. So I was like, there's a lot more value than just the amount that of produce that's going in this plot. It's actually the method. And so we sort of like put it in a website and just outlined it. And there were 6 steps, and it's the website's still live. So it's polyculturepaddock.co.nz. And I've also sort of just gone a little bit more into detail in a YouTube video that we've got called Polyculture Paddock Implementation or something that's on the Future Whenua channel. And so
better, the sprayed part or the worked part?
they both grew, but the worked part was a lot easier to harvest. So the spray did have a kill, like Burns mentioned in the farm tool. We sort of mixed in EM and fish into that spray to try and use as little spray as possible. It did kill everything, but then the regrowth sort of came up. So by the time it got later in the season, I'm sort of having to harvest in amongst the regrowing clovers and grasses, whereas the worked part, they both grew quite well, but it was just a bit easier for harvesting where we'd cultivated.
And slightly longer sustained, maybe.
And slightly longer sustained, yeah. So it just became this thing like, originally I got this real flush of bok choys and some of the like earlier mesclans, and then they all like went to seed. I'm like, oh, they're gone. And then up came all the lettuces, and we had this like really diverse like mix of, and then they went to seed, and oh, the lettuces are gone. But then that came all the kales, and so it was a singular sowing date, but I got a successional harvest because we used diversity and really like even rather than like just having carrots and parsnips and kohlrabi, I had about 4 different types of carrots. So there were some that came up pretty early, and like obviously like the radishes just come like super soon. But some of the carrots were a bit early, and some were just only really coming to their own like deep into winter. And we just kept on eating for it for about 9 months, and I thought, well, this is like pretty crazy. And so we have been trialing with it and just like different blends for the last couple of years. It takes a bit of a back seat just because we're sort of trying to do so much at once with Future Whenua and everything else. So it's something I'd really like one of the big like Crown research agencies like Plant and Food have sort of tried to hand it off to them and say, hey, can you guys explore the potential of this like direct seeded horticultural method that's sort of like mimicking nature and applying permacultural principles but lifting it into an agricultural scale. And so I think it would be really good for farmers like me and that are thinking about like how do I just grow my own food but are pretty time poor. But it would also just be like lifestyle blocks and people that are surrounding towns, like how, because there's a bit of a skills gap in the way that we can grow our food. We all sort of like each group in Rochelle's workshop yesterday located that as one of the issues, is just a bit of a lack of green thumb within the community. So this, you're never going to get like a head of broccoli that looks like someone like a master gardener like Robin would grow. But what we can do is get some of the essentials like the leafy greens and the root crops just like pretty easily without too much work, as we start to remember and develop those gardening skills that like will give us the head of cauliflower. So it's got some, you know, we can see behind me, this is a failed strip. This was sowed with a mixture of the roots and the leaves, and mostly what we can see here is fat hen and willow root. I've been using the same strip for 3 years now, and I don't weed it and I don't spray it. So these weeds have had a chance to set their seed, and they're really prolific. A singular fat hen going to seed lets about 10,000 seeds off. So that's something I've realised, is that we might have to change plots, and I have actually got another one as you come out and onto the side. If when you're leaving you wanted to like turn into that paddock and check it out, it's a bit different to this, and you'll see the multitudinous mix, which we've used like on the roadside and alongside inside one of our crops. It's just been completely beautiful. There's been these deep blues and purples and reds and oranges. The colour's been magnificent. It's been more beautiful than it's been food producing this year. But so yeah, this is one of the troubles, is just like weed burden, because I haven't been managing it and I haven't been spraying it, so it's taken over. And behind, yeah, you can see one that's a little more successful, but there's not too much for human consumption in there, apart from some sort of beans and a few of the kales. But we sort of sowed that strip as well, just with some things that will be a bit bulky to keep Chumpy happy through winter.
Do you have a particular use for the sunflowers, or is it just the pig gets them?
Yeah, it's sort of like a soil remediation. Yeah, if someone like came in and wanted to harvest them and use them for floral arrangements, we've had small case uses for that. We harvested a whole bunch of them at Burning Horse, and people were sort of like walking around the dance floors with sunflowers. It was pretty cool. So not a particular use, no. But yeah, it's just something I've been exploring. If it were taken out of my hands and into the hands of someone that really understands horticulture and understands food production, could give a bit more time and love, I think there's a huge amount of potential for it. Like I say, I think it could apply for like larger scale farmers and smaller land holdings, particularly like lifestyle blocks around towns, just as a way of getting some bulk food going. And like if it was anything like what we had like the first and second year, there was just so much food, and then like all of a sudden the entrepreneurs would be like, oh, this is how we could use this in a food system, and just like that would start to come about, and it would just take a little bit of the pressure off the amount of effort that would have to go into creating horticultural gardens in like year one to get the food system sort of in the localized like deliveries and everything sorted. I think councils should really be looking into stuff like this, on how they use roadsides, areas and parks that are like currently just, you know, there's a lot of park area that gets used and people are playing frisbee and touch and stuff, but there's a lot of managed grass area around our districts that it's just a lot of effort and council and ratepayer money going into that. So this is, you know, whether we planted in luxuriant leaves and rambled roots and really had it as like community just food commons, or else you could do something a bit more like the multitudinous mix, and all of these can be adapted. You could use any species you possibly liked, but it's sort of just really about an easy way of converting grass into like abundant and naturally mimicking garden, whilst we sort of like, yeah, toy with the amount of like human labor units that are going into this. Yes, Amy?
Question regarding the integration of livestock into this. Can you graze them? Like, how does that work? Do you bring the sheep through this, and do they happily eat bits and pieces? And
Hmm. Yeah, the sheep, without my permission, have found their way in here at some really unopportune times with a couple of my chows. It could, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So by about this time of the year, we're not left with too much. Apart from the root crops, there are still some like good beets and everything in there, but most of the lettuces and everything like this have all gone to seed. Set the seed actually, and that's another part of it, because I've just left it for things to set the seed. It has allowed the weed species to get quite prolific, but there's other areas like this whole zone where Trumpy's in right now. I didn't sow this year, and we could have fed dozens and dozens of people off here. It was like, you know, Trumpy, and we had old Major in here for a lot of the summer as well. They're voracious eaters, and they couldn't keep up with it. It was just like all salads, and we didn't sow it. We didn't do a single thing. It just regrew because we'd let everything go to seed. And you might see in the background all there, that was just like this sea of yellow, and it was really tall. And those are all actually parsnips. And so it's really interesting to see some of these like simple plant species that we only really see one aspect of their life cycle, just to be able to like observe them express themselves over 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and just seeing how things sort of evolve. So particularly that back corner, that's what we did in the very first year 3 years ago, and I haven't been back in there in some of the zones, and I've just been watching, because we put some perennial species, like could we sow once, walk away, and will it keep on feeding us? And so there's still sort of like garlic chives and spring onions and various things in there that we could go, and in a pinch would be like quite happy to just live off sorrel for a while or something. And those are still all feeding. Again, it would take some tweaking to get it right, but there's a huge potential for it.
Zeb, can I just say it's really great to see you getting turned on to plants. For an agriculturalist, it's a vital step, because you start thinking about all the details and all the interactions, just as you're describing. But what you're describing here is kind of like a paddock garden, right? You know, throughout Southland, farmers have traditionally grown a paddock garden by the same method that you're using here. Maybe they'd use more potatoes and swedes and so on to feed the family. And they would just take a block of land that's been grazed, fence it off as you've done, drill it and grow it, and then the next year just move it on, do it again somewhere else. I reckon that in order to heal the rural-urban divide that some people believe exists, the resentment that the urban people might have for the rural people in terms of pollution and all this kind of thing, and in terms of climate change, and in terms of any natural disaster that might be coming, economic or earthquake or whatever, if every Southland farmer every year put in a paddock garden, doesn't have to be this big, grew food in there just in case there was a disaster, and that they were then willing to share that food with the community, rural and urban. And in reality, they were willing to do that. If they didn't need to do that, they could just use it themselves or put their animals in there. I reckon the urban community would come to believe the farmer was the hero, because they're investing in something that they don't have to do. It's altruistic, it's giving, they're doing it for the sake of the whole community, not just the rural community. This is my dream, because I've been thinking about that, exactly what you're doing here for a long time now. This must happen, and happen soon, for a whole lot of different reasons.
Can we get any points on the farm environment
Yes,
plans?
absolutely. The farmer becomes the hero, just like that. They already know how to do it, and it's traditional in Southland. It's to lose.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Robin. Thank you for holding that vision, because I know that it sort of affects the field when you hold on to a vision and can.
Add it to our future farmers minister stuff.
Great.
Shameless plug on that front. If you do want to check out the video, so it's Polyculture Paddock implementation on the Future Fenway YouTube page. I'd love for you guys to check it out, because it is a really good video on the topic.
Yes, Brooke?
There's a seed company in the States that does they're called Green Cover, and they do an expanded version of the Millbrook garden, which I think this is a very similar idea. It's an old Mexican concept of growing your squash beans and corn together, because they're complementary species, the three sisters. But this company runs a program where they will give you an acre worth of, it's like 37 complementary species that they've put together. They'll give you an acre worth of seed free if you commit half of the crop to a local hunger relief organization.
Incredible.
So it might be a lovely, and we're doing that this year. We've got 2 acres of it set aside, for that purpose, but you can work with your seed company to do a similar thing to encourage all of the Southwest farmers to just plant that acre.
Amazing. And that's green cover. Cool. That sounds like a great one too.
Milpa seed mix.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, yeah, I really just wanted to give a brief introduction. Maybe after we've finished this workshop, we could walk around there and like head into the museum and just like see what we see in there at this point. But so thank you for your attention. We're now going to turn to another direct seeded technology. This time not horticulture, but restoration. Really exciting. Onwards to Peter.